on what you should be doing as you visit the seed plots in your neighborhood, and how that little bit of effort that you could put to it. I know the pork chop and the beer is good, but what could you do? What could you do out there to help identify the hybrids that you're planting? We call it hybrid characteristics. Okay. I only have 4 kids, and I can never get their names right, but I know them by appearance who they are. In a scenario where kind of like how many livestock people in the room, or in the tent, I should say. So when you go to pick breeding stock, right, you do want to know statistics, birthing weight, and all that. But what else you want to know before you purchase the animal? You're going to go see it, right? See if it's going to fit with your breeding program. Corn's kind of the same way. Unfortunately, though, a lot of our growers don't spend a lot of time on picking their hybrids. The effort is more in who won the last plot, who won the county plot, maybe price gets into it. I find my growers spend more time picking out the accessories on their new pickup than they do on the hybrids they choose, which as a consultant, we consult on all aspects of farming, except for marketing, because you guys know how to do that. And we look through thousands of acres of yield maps every year, and there's 2 things that separate themselves from everything else that's happening in the field that generate the highest yield. I make my living in the soil testing business, so I'd like to tell you fertility's at the top, but it's like 13 on the list. Number 1 is water management. So that can be irrigation, that can be drainage, compaction, plant density, hybrid selection becomes part of that. Right behind it, number 2 is hybrid selection. So it's one of the 2 most important decisions you can make that separates your operation from somebody that's average. But for a lot of growers, it's based off of plot data, how did it yield, and assuming that the plot was put in the exact same way that you farm, you buy it and bring it home. A lot of times it's full of seed in the spring, and the one closest to the door is the one that gets planted. We start with our full season corns and end with our long seasons, or vice versa. We got a method of how we're going to plant them because we're thinking about harvesting. But actually picking a hybrid for the field that you're going to is something that we don't get a lot of. Part of that is because we don't know how the hybrid would fit. So part of the job when you're picking a hybrid is find the strengths and weaknesses of the hybrid and match those up to the strengths and weaknesses of the fields that you're putting in. So you're going to farm around the weakness, take advantage of the strengths within the field. So when we go to a plot, things that we would look at is some of the basic stuff. For instance, in this plot, we have height. So we have a short hybrid, 3 medium hybrids here, and a tall hybrid on the end. Just knowing whether short, medium, or tall becomes part of the picture in the hybrid. And you're going to, I say a lot of times, we have a ringer. We have a hybrid we really like, and we put it on a lot of acres. Get to know that hybrid. Then compare everything else to it. So are the other hybrids taller, shorter, more open, more closed? Then look at the tassel type. Tassel type is pretty uniform through here, except for this one and the one at the end. They're different. Why would you want to know what your tassel looks like on the corn you're planting? It's a genetic part of it, right? So if somebody came to you and said, I'm going to sell you the same seed you like, but it's in a different bag and $40 cheaper, but the tassels aren't the same, are they the same hybrid? No, they're not the same hybrid. They may have a parent that's the same, but they're not the same hybrid. But if you look through your lineup, every plant from the different companies you buy is the same height, same tassel, same leaf structure. What might you have? You might have the same hybrid, okay? Meaning that you don't have any mitigation of risk by moving those hybrids around. Typically, mitigating risk would also be some short, some medium, some long seed corn, and then you plant the short season first, the long season last. And why do you do that? Well, they aren't all pollinating in the same week, right? If you flip them, they're going to pollinate in the same week, and that, I don't know what would be here during pollination, but if we hit 100 degrees during pollination like we did this year, it's rough on some of those fields that are trying to pollinate in that week. So you're trying to spread that out. You're also trying to spread out your harvest.
Yeah, and also
that meant a lot more before the high-speed planter. Now, how long does it take you to plant corn today? Yeah, so early and late planting is Monday and Friday. You know, a situation where it's pretty much done in that scenario. So one of the things in corn, soybeans the same way. Actually, anything you grow that uses photosynthesis to produce starch and food is going to operate the same way. You need to harvest sunlight. Today is a beautiful day for growing anything. You need to harvest that sunlight and turn it into starch. Any sunlight that hits the ground is wasted energy. Right? That's what's driving this whole process. So when we think about our crop out here, we have to get uniform canopy cover. You want to capture 97% of the light in your cornfield, in your bean field, and then you maximized one of the big three sunlight, water, and nutrients. You capture 97% of the light out there. You've mastered sunlight capture. I can come to your field. It's getting a little bit late now, but shortly after tassel, you're at the maximum leaf area index. I can squat down in the midday and look down the row and look for how much sunlight's hitting the ground. And if the ground is 97% covered with a high amount of accuracy, I can tell you that yield will not go up by raising the population. You've maximized it as far as plant density. It'll be fungicide, insecticide, fertility plans that change it after that. Soybeans the same way. If I get down there and we're just coming into R1, R2, and no sunlight hits the ground, whether you're in 30-inch rows or 15s, if that's 100,000 population in soybeans, you still have maxed out your population. Going from 100 to 150 or 200 will not increase yield by population. Okay? So corn is the same way. Now, once we've captured all the sunlight, going up in population adds stress. Adds stress to the picture. Because once we close the rows, the water loss per day levels out. So you lose water in the field through evaporation off the ground and transpiration off the top. When you close the rows, it's all basically transpiration. And 30,000 plants, and you guys will have to put the Canadian factor in there, whatever you go by hectares or whatever, but 30,000 plants per acre is going to lose a 1/4 inch of water a day through transpiration, let's say, and 36 or 38,000 will also lose a 1/4 inch of water per day. But if I'm losing a 1/4 inch per water per day on 38,000 plants, I have less water per plant. If I have less water per plant, what else do I have less of? Nutrients, right? We lift those nutrients up in there. So over here at 30,000, I may have 14 part per million nitrate. The corn is happy. That same 14 part per million nitrate in the soil at 38,000, I may show N deficiency right up to the ear. I have to keep the soil concentration higher. I got to have a thicker syrup because to get it in, I have to have a higher concentration. So again, high populations on low fertility, for instance, show up right away. We know high populations also show up when it comes to water management because I have less water per plant, less ability to cool per plant. So in terms of juggling that, as far as what is the right population in the field. So if we want to manage water, be more efficient with nutrients, one way we can do that is take our population down. But if we take our population down for water and nutrients, what might be the end effect of capturing sunlight? We could lose it. Sunlight could hit the ground. We think about the hybrids that Dad and Grandpa used to grow for wide rows. They were very wide leaf hybrids, tall hybrids, and very pendulum in nature. The leaves would just reach out to close a 36, 38, or 40-inch row. The thing as we took those populations up, pretty soon we realized that raising population no longer could raise yield. You were up against it, and about 10, for sure 15 years ago, the plant breeders realized we need to capture more sunlight. So they took the old architecture and changed it. So they started to go to an upright format. As they went to an upright format, more sunlight can get deeper in the canopy, more leaves can participate in the food production, and then we've busted through yield barriers and we haven't stopped since. When we talk about horsepower with corn, as a rule of thumb, a lot of horsepower comes with the upright leaf structure. But what it doesn't bring a lot of times is drought protection. The situation where too much sunlight can hit the ground. And if too much sunlight hits the ground, we can burn that crop up. So as you're thinking about picking for each field, what's my water supply? If I'm under irrigation, I'm in bottom ground with good water tables, and I very seldom have water issues, I need to be swinging for the fence. If I'm on gravel or sand or light soils that have a tendency to burn up, I need to think about water management, which means I need to pull my population down. But when I pull my population down, I still have to capture all the sunlight. So it starts to become a combination of leaf and ear structure. And there's a bunch of them out there today, and I got some. I just took a sample from this plot. Obviously, we have short, and we have medium, and we have tall in height. The taller it is, the more sunlight we can capture from that standpoint, and do it quicker. And those leaf structures, when I look at this plant, how we would classify it, and these are crop tech kin Ferrie nomenclature, so they're going to be different in every seed catalog that you look at, but we would call this a more upright hybrid. The leaves go upright. This one's kind of broke, and the ear leaf is upright, and we go upright through the top, so it's a more upright hybrid. We like to break them down and say if they're upright from the bottom to the top, they're upright. If they're pendulum up past the ear, and then they go upright, we call that semi-pendulum. If they're upright at the ear leaf, we call that semi-upright. If they're upright all the way to the top, it's an upright hybrid. If they're pendulum all the way to the top, we call them pendulum. Now, a lot of times with pendulum hybrids, the tassel kind of stands out by itself, and the upper leaf is more horizontal. With full upright hybrids, a lot of times the upper leaves are parallel with the tassel. Now, they can be both tall and short in that sequence. So this is we would call this a more upright short hybrid. And this to be a more pendulum short hybrid. The leaves are stretching out to close that row and staying wide. Look at this guy. Would we say he's upright or pendulum? He's pendulum. And he's a monster at the same, but she's open architecture all the way up. This is a sunlight goblin monster, okay, as far as per plant goes. But when we see that leaf structure, realize that it's probably not going to be so important to have high populations with it, okay? That it's going to capture sunlight at lower populations. So if I lower the population for here to capture the sunlight due to its height and due to its structure, it's still going to capture that sunlight. Okay? Meaning that probably a pretty good chance at 30 or 32,000, this thing's going to max out in population. Okay? Because there won't be any more sunlight. Then we got to do the rest of that increase with something else. Compared to this medium height one, and you see these leaves are upright, okay? So this one here is going to be a hybrid that we're probably going to have to push the population in. If we lower the population too much, we're going to have sunlight hitting the ground and we're going to waste it. So if I'm growing this hybrid and I'm planting it at 32,000, let's say, and I walk out there at high noon and the tassels are out and a lot of sunlight's hitting the ground, what can I do with this hybrid then to capture that sunlight? What could I do to make sure that sunlight isn't wasted?
And a higher population.
Higher population. As you push your population up, you crowd the row, the plant tends to get a little bit taller, and you gather more of that sunlight. If I'm going to push the population up to go after that sunlight, what else do I have to have?
Water.
I got to have water and nutrients. So a situation when I'm pushing the population up, I'm realistically pushing yield goal up. With that yield goal should come the nutrients, but I got to have the water. What if I don't have water? What if I don't have water and I push this guy up? What's going to happen? Probably going to burn up on me, right? So if I don't have water, but I really like this hybrid, what could I do to capture that sunlight?
20-inch rows.
Narrow up the rows. I could narrow up the rows and maybe not change my population and still catch the same amount of the extra sunlight and push it. When we talk about, we have twins, 20s, a few 15s, but mainly 15s or 20s and twins that we work with down there. The secret in narrow row corn is all hybrid selection. So it's all hybrid selection and how you're managing. We use narrow row corn for two reasons: ultra low water holding capacity soils, so we can take populations down in the 16 to 18,000 range, or high horsepower soils where we want to continue to grab sunlight and push yields on up past the 36, 37, 38,000. Okay? But I could take this and put it in a narrow row and leave the population the same, and it's going to probably increase yield once it captures that sunlight. But if I go back to this guy, I close the rows in 30 inches. I close the rows at 30,000. I take him and I put him in narrow rows and I shove the population to 34. What's going to happen? I almost guarantee you yield will go backwards. There was no more sunlight to capture, and when you went from up to 4,000 or 5,000 plant population, you just added stress. This would not be a narrow row hybrid unless you were planting back down into that 15 to 20,000 in a dry land corner or something like that. But typically when we think about narrow rows, we're talking about swinging higher for yield. So pendulum leaves do fit, but typically when we're talking about narrow rows, we don't go much below a semi-pendulum. We'll stay in the semi-upright range for our hybrid selection because that'll make a difference on how much sunlight we can actually capture. There's other factors that blend into that too, right? So one is selection of the ears, and hybrids adjust their kernel set based on stress. So this plot has 22 in the back and I think 36 on the front, and all it is population and what would change how that kernel sets. So this first hybrid is a hybrid that adjusts kernels based on population. So one of the first things that we select is girth. So when the plant's real small and the roots come together, they sense competition. And some hybrids make an adjustment in girth. It's made by V6. Okay? So the only difference here is population, but you can see the high population was enough that the plant sense the stress, and this one shut its kernel girth down. Same hybrid without that stress didn't shut it down. Now this one made some of that back in length because it had the starch to fill it. But it tells us that this hybrid is making a decision in girth or kernel number. Going to be important in that situation. So when the kernel girth is made is emergence to V6. So this thing cannot have a bad day in that window or she could shut it down. But population alone will do it. Then in a situation where we have to be careful. So that would be where you plant it, starter fertilizer, how you manage your seed bed, those types of things. Going into heavy cover crop where you're putting a lot of pressure on the season early, this hybrid's probably not going to last. Then we decide how long we're going to be. Some hybrids will truncate cob and all. So there'll be 35 long fills at the tip, but the cob will have truncated. That happens from V6 to tassel. Other hybrids are 50 long pollinated and they abort back to 35. We call those L2 hybrids down there where they abort after tassel. But the thing is, number of kernels is making that difference.
2 minutes, Ken.
Okay. Other hybrids don't change their kernel set. So the kernel set stays the same. What they change is depth. So at low populations, we can't reach around it. At high populations, we can. Mass of kernel, depth of kernel. And the new hybrids today, a lot of them are in that arena. So a situation where depth of kernel. So if the hybrid gets its yield from depth of kernel, doesn't change its kernel count, it can have a rough start. You can bounce it around a little bit. But depth of kernel or mass of kernel comes the last 30 days of grain. So from when the tassel comes out to black layer, we have 60 days. The last 30 days are go time for those hybrids. The depth of kernel or mass hybrids. So what would you want to do to make sure you got every bit of sunlight captured in the last 30 days of growth? Fungicides, late N applications, perfect weather. We can lay out the perfect plan, and if the last 30 days are cloudy and miserable, it isn't going to happen. But if the last 30 days are like today, for instance, then the kernel depth will drastically change in these hybrids. 100 years ago in college, we divide by 80,000 kernels to get a bushel. We now have genetics today that we can divide by 50 to 55,000 kernels to make a bushel. Where in some of our plots at 22,000, we're still hitting 250 bushels. Seems like it's impossible. Sometimes you look at contest winners and you do the math, you say, there's no way he can do that on that many years in a situation where they're getting it. So out in your field, when you get home, look at a gap. Find a gap. You have big ears in the gap, take one of those ears. Go to an area where you have perfect spacing and take the same ear and look at those ears and see how they change. They'll give you a hint of whether they're mass or whether their number of pruning. If they change at the bottom, the front end of your season's important. If they change in length, then that's going to be during the rapid growth and the grain fill at the end. It helps you with your management. We'll talk more about that after lunch in the presentation. It helps you more with thinking about how do I manage. What we get to see all the time is we're doing thousands of acres of yield maps. And a farmer comes in the morning, we go through his maps, look at that hybrid. It is amazing. It's earned its way on more acres on my farm. Look at how it performs. He leaves after lunch, his neighbor comes in. That hybrid sucks. It's gone. It's out of here. In a situation where then the difference is they're farming in the same triangle, they just get different management styles. One uses a fungicide, one doesn't. One uses plantar fertility, and one doesn't. So as you go to these spots, if they'll let you, get out in there and look at those ears. Look for the gap. Grab a big ear and look for a picket fence, not only in this row, but one on both sides. Look at those ears and then take a look at the height. I recommend take a picture. So later this winter, you can say, well, here's my hybrid, and here is what these other hybrids look like compared to my hybrid. And if you know your hybrid that you're comfortable with, when you go to all these plot tours, you can make that comparison. So you don't end up with the same genetics, and you find something that you can put in your live soil at lower populations, something that you can step on it in your soils where you've got plenty of water.
So what population should we plant that then?
The right one. But
I just want simple ideas.
yeah. You know, and again, you put the Canadian factor to it as far as where it is for us. As we look at most of our populations, are going to range from our sandier soils in the 24-26 range, and we're going to be topping out at 36 or 38. But it also depends on the hybrid. The full pendulum hybrid like that, most of them will stop at 36.
On Rod on that tough soil you have, you got to go at least 60,000.
Oh,